Okay. This afternoon's presentation, the first one, will be using geospatial data to drive broadband expansion by Colter Sikora and Milena Bernardinello. Colter has been with the Public Service Commission for a number of years, and many of you know him as he's on our WLA board. Milena is a new member of the Public Service Commission, and Colter and her are happy to present this presentation to you.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Jeremy. I will be happier when I know that all of the screen displays are up. I have just flashed Acrobat PDF, ArcGIS, and Google Earth in the last minute. So if somebody can chat back and let me know that you've seen any of those three, that would be wonderful and reassuring. And otherwise, I think we are good to go. If someone can send that to me in the chat, that will be my last, if you will, check of anything, and then we'll move ahead. Let's see. Testing 1, 2, you all can hear me, I assume.
Yes, we can hear you.
Excellent. And you can see a PowerPoint or a PDF?
Yeah.
Fantastic.
I see a presentation.
All right, now I just got 5 chats in a row. So there they all came in at once. Looks like we're ready to go. So, all right, moving into this. Thank you so much, Jeremy, and everybody here at the WLIA fall, not regional meeting, but fall virtual meeting this year. As Jeremy mentioned, I am Colter Sikora, and with me is Milena Bernardinello, and we both work for the Public Service Commission of Wisconsin's Wisconsin Broadband Office. And while we work on a number of things, GIS is at our heart, and this is another opportunity, since we have presented with other mapping colleagues over the last few years. This is another opportunity for you to look into what's going on at the Public Service Commission and how we're using GIS to help drive broadband expansion. Milena?
Thank you, Colter. I'm going to just give you a verbal presentation of the outline rather than having a specific slide for it. We are going to touch upon the basic of the Broadband Expansion Grant Program. We're going to look at the data that determines grant eligibility and prioritized area. And then we're going to share how we trained our applicants to submit quality grant mapping data. And Colter is going to start with the basic for you.
Wonderful. Thank you, Milena. So a number of you have heard kind of the summary of what the Wisconsin Broadband Office is. So I'm going to try to breeze through that. Certainly our role, especially as a state government agency, oftentimes we're tagged with a regulatory label, but the Broadband Office isn't necessarily known for being a regulatory machine because we don't really regulate. Certainly our role is more focused on encouraging and supporting broadband deployment across the dairy state. Of course, especially as it applies to WLIA and the various partnerships that we have in the mapping world, mapping internet coverage and trying to help figure out ways to map that better is a big priority for our office. But our most visible priority is running the Broadband Expansion Grant Program. There are a number of subsidy programs and grants that are run certainly within state government, maybe more so within federal government. But since fiscal year 2014, we have run, I believe this is our 8th or 9th round of broadband expansion grants. We usually roll this grant out once every fiscal year. And to date, we have deployed $44 million worth of grant funding, hitting almost every county in the state. If you factor in the matched funding that comes from county governments, from internet service providers, and any number of other stakeholders, that $44 million becomes a much larger number. And it's exciting to see where that public-private partnership and sometimes public-public partnershiping works to help improve the lives for folks across our state. So digging into, and I've given a little bit of a hint of this already, but we are in the middle of a new grant round, which we are rolling out $24 million available here for fiscal year 21, along with fiscal year 2020. This is the most amount of grant funding that we have set up for deployment in any single grant round within the broadband expansion grant program. So it's a chance for us to do a lot of good in a, in a very immediate moment, especially as the need for internet, as many of you who are working from home right now can attest to, especially if you're from a rural area that is struggling and wanting for internet access. Our application window is going to be open until 4 p.m. on December the 1st. And the PSC is in the process of leading training sessions and webinars to engage and guide stakeholders across the state to help encourage them to apply for our grants. And of course, while having this discussion and conversation in a WLIA meeting isn't necessarily expected to draw grant applications out, you all are being exposed to, if you will, a taste of what we usually do in our webinars. So the first thing that we're going to look at, we're kind of watering down that webinar or training webinar based approach today, is we're going to take a look at our grant eligible and prioritized areas. And I believe, Milena, you're going to give us an explanation of what really counts for broadband grant funding.
For sure, Colter. I don't know if everybody can see the slides, but I still see the titles. So I don't know if I'm having some difficulty. I want to make sure people can see.
I just received those chats as well, so I am updating this as quickly as I can. Thank you, Milena, and the folks who have chatted me recently. If you can talk your way through them, though, that would be good.
So we were supposed to show you a map with some colors. It's supposed to be a map, light blue, dark blue. So you're going to see very soon. But substantially, with this map that we are going to see very soon, I'm going to help you to navigate the terms that we generally use to determine the area in Wisconsin that are eligible or they are prioritized for broadband expansion grant funding. And as all the mappers know, map can be questionable sometimes. So we want to make sure that all our applicants are using the same map to identify where their project is going to be. And in this colored area on this map, those are the areas that are eligible for receiving broadband grants based on a broader definition of what is being defined as underserved. And the FCC defined as underserved any area with fewer than 2 providers offering a broadband service. And you might gonna ask, what is a broadband service? This is a definition that the Wisconsin statute set based on speed. And this speed requirement for broadband service are a minimum of 25 megabits download and 3 megabits upload. And today we know that these speed levels are no longer a luxury. We all need it. Particularly, we know how the school are gonna end up needing now, which has never been a prior focus before, and now is emerging so incredibly that we also are supporting the DPI with identifying this unserved area, and particularly the unserved population. They have children or this kind of much larger families. So, you know, rural area in Wisconsin have this problem more than others. School districts are struggling with that. So we want our applicant to focus on this map, reminding that this certain population is very in need of it. And now that you have your map in front of you, you see that there are 2 different colors that we use to color this map. And every color here is underserved, but there is a blue area that you probably have noticed that is another subset. And the reason why this is a subset is important. This is the dark blue area on this map, identify areas that are unserved. And according again to the FCC definition for unserved, those are areas that are not served by a fixed wireless or a wireline internet service provider that is offering at least 5 megabits download and 0.6 upload. And basically there is very, very minimal service in that area, and some place no service at all. And so these dark blue areas are particularly important for the broadband grant application because an unserved area is a priority factor for scoring the proposed project. And in fact, this definition is included in the broadband grant application instruction. A caveat though to remember is that, and mapper like you probably, especially the one we work with population data, they immediately say, hey, there is no population in some places of those blue areas. And obviously we know that. So this area would probably remain unserved unless some of you want to move there tomorrow. And with this, we are going to have Colter leading to the next part of this basic information.
Excellent. Thank you, Milena. And apologies for the technical difficulties. It looks like I missed the fact that there is a button called New Share that allows me to switch screens. So now that we've realized that there is this wonderful technology, I am going to ask, can you see a slide that says Wisconsin Broadband Map WBM? If someone can send it in chat, that would be wonderful. Fabulous. I'm going to do it one more time. This time you should see the live demo. Do you see that? Nice. Okay, good. All right, we're on the money again, at least for a moment. We are in honest to goodness PowerPoint mode again. So the Wisconsin Broadband Map, certainly a number of you folks have seen it over the years. I think we actually submitted it in the broadband or in the mapping contest a few years ago. But the broadband map displays advertised coverage across the state for our consumers. So internet basically made for folks, you know, at the household level, not necessarily business level stuff. And it's been, if you will, the flagship mapping tool for our broadband office and for advocating for better broadband access for years now. And we still expect it to serve as that tool for the foreseeable future. We are in the process at the PSC of upgrading our ArcGIS Enterprise environment, which has put, unfortunately, a bit of a pause on updating some of our coverage data. So for those of you who are into digging into the technical weeds of mapping internet access, there is a discrepancy between what coverage data we have available on the map and what is actually used for our broadband expansion grant eligible status guideline layer. We have them articulated at this point basically by the fiscal year that we developed that data. And as soon as we're able to upgrade our coverage data, we will get that posted online as soon as possible. But a major part that figures into how broadband data is mapped across the state, and really even what parts of the state are at least initially determined eligible for broadband expansion, is the fact that our broadband coverage maps are generally determined by census block mapping standards, which, well, especially if you live in large rural census blocks, often leads to a common question we get from consumers and probably from several of the folks here in this meeting. Colter or Milena, your map says that I should have internet at my address in rural any county in Wisconsin, USA. But I've called provider 1 and I've called provider 2, and none of those providers say I can get internet on my segment of road. What's the deal? How can I get better internet? Why is your map wrong? Milena, I think we traditionally talk about this, especially in our last slideshow, and me almost forgetting the detailed slide that we normally have here. We usually are able to, with our mapping data, we look at our broadband coverage as really a guideline. And yes, certainly if we say that your map is underserved for internet access, then yes, you can apply for a broadband expansion grant and be eligible for grant funding. But certainly in our grant program, we also encourage folks that even though our map says they may be served, if they can prove that there isn't internet access at their location, we're able to take in applications from areas that appear served anyway. So despite the fact that we've had a number of screen difficulties here, we're going to make a bold attempt at having a live demo, assuming I can find the right screen to jump to, or else we're going to just proceed with the rest of the slideshow here, because I'd like to show you some of the mapping data that we're able to work with here at the PSC. So investigating grant eligible and prioritized areas. At this point, you should have an ArcGIS window on your screen. Does that sound correct, folks? Forgive the added technical interactivity here. Excellent. Good deal. So we are looking at Northern Bayfield County. If you are a great Wisconsin geography geek, this is the Myers Beach area where you can walk out onto Lake Superior in a good and cold winter and enjoy the ice caves. What we're going to do is take a look at our broadband expansion grant eligibility status layer that we have available for folks to download, and also our census block listing tied to grant eligibility, and give you an idea of some of the data that we can look at here at the Public Service Commission. So if I zoom in close to where Highway 13 almost meets up with Lake Superior, you're going to see, of course, this heavy black line, which is State Highway 13, and several fairly random looking gray lines. My screen is updated and refreshing ArcGIS as we speak. As you can imagine, those are census blocks, which again, most of our coverage data is built off of that. But if you look very closely at the different shades of blue that Milena mentioned earlier, you'll see some of these boundaries follow our census block data, and some of these boundaries seem to be of a more granular sort. So I'm going to go ahead and actually run an identify on this census block that is partially on our screen and take a look at some of the attributes that come in from our layers. We'll take a look at our grant eligibility layer first, which we have under this funky code name of BBEXPG eligibility status. Basically, this is the layer that says which parts of the state are considered served and unserved for internet. So from what we have here, this is an unserved part of the state. So we don't have many attributes to look at here. It's really a simple, yes, you can apply for the broadband expansion grant based on data that we have. To get a little more into the weeds, especially since our broadband stakeholders have been interested in seeing a census block by census block approach, we decided for the first time this year to make a census block listing of every block in the state to basically get an idea of how eligible for internet or for broadband expansion grant funding they really are. We have just started to receive granular internet coverage data from some of our providers, including one up in the Bayfield area. So it's fun to look at some of our data here in the state where we can actually go in and see that, yes, for the most part, or for the entire part, this particular census block ID there, because I don't think I need to read a 15-digit census block identity code. It is 100% eligible for our grant. We have all of the attribute data explained in README files that we have available for documentation. And we also took the time to calculate the percentages and total areas of our census blocks across the state that are either unserved for internet access or underserved for internet access, so that we could determine basically how eligible each census block is in the state. We also tie this together with housing statistics and population statistics, of course, in the 2010 census, but as the 2020 data roll out in the near future, we will figure that into our data as well. And certainly as internet expansion or internet coverage data collection changes both in the state and at the federal level, we expect things to evolve as far as our mapping strategies go as well. So I'm going to go ahead and get back to the PowerPoint. At this point, I'm going to trust that things are working properly. And now I'm actually seeing this lovely screen highlight. So we should be back in PowerPoint mode. And I'm going to go ahead and proceed through our slides here again. And that is the demo that we just walked through. Do make a note, especially as we do make slides available. You can download our broadband expansion grant data from our download page available on the Public Service Commission website. So our next big piece is really training applicants to send quality grant mapping data, which is something we've been fighting with really the whole time we've been running this grant program. Milena, would you like to explain what we're looking for out of our applicants?
Oh, for sure. We just had a webinar training our applicant for the fiscal year 2021. So we thought it was very appropriate to share with you what we are trying to convey to our mappers. They are not necessarily real mappers. And in fact, sometimes the mapping portion of a proposed project is often assigned to a technical team member. And in the broadband expansion grant application instruction, there is though a specific section related to mapping that we decided to highlight to the attendee because maybe they don't have access to reading the whole application. And so we want to have all of them on the same page, and at this point, having all of you on the same page. So the proposed project is required to be submitted accompanied by some maps. That's the basic requirement. And although well done, static maps, generally as PDF, are the basic requirements, and they also work very well for the reviewers that are scoring the project, ideally, we would like to also receive the related spatial data set, which can be just a URL reference to a spatial file showing the proposed service area or a census block, a file with census blocks that intersect the proposed project area. However, we are aware that some applicants might not have the skills or even access to a GIS software. And therefore, we give them another option, so another format in which applicants can provide the requested mappable information at this point. And it is a tabular file listing either the range of addresses the project will serve or the census blocks within the proposed project area. However, in case neither a spatial file or a tabular file is available, providing a map using Google Maps to draw the boundary of the project they were trying to submit will be acceptable, although we stress quite strongly that would not be the ideal way. And now Colter is going to show you the how, why we told them about good practice and preferable practice and not ideal practice.
Good practice, bad practice, ideal practice, all the things. I say this as someone who's been trying to influence our grant application language almost from the beginning to try to get more digital data to come in. So you all can imagine, especially as GIS professionals in the case of the majority of you, why is having good spatial data important? Certainly when our broadband expansion grant applications are submitting data, they're going to have the most accurate depictions of what their projects look like. And to have folks that are relatively disconnected from them, us at the PSC, go ahead and try to redraw their mapping layers, certainly it's time consuming. If you have had a chance to look at, usually there's certain modeled internet coverage data. It doesn't really matter who specifically is submitting it, but modeled internet coverage data is usually depicted as, those big maps that cover the entire state or cover the entire country with very complex geometry that you're not going to be able to reproduce in a manual form or even a standard digitizing format with any real sense of accuracy. So we really, really would prefer to not go redrawing our applicants' mapping data. And that's really the goal that we're trying to accomplish through the mapping webinar that we actually just had last Thursday. So a couple of examples of what we've seen over the last few years that just don't work well. Some of them are crazy and we don't see them often, thankfully. Certainly, if you look at the screen cap on the left, if you don't send a map, your application isn't eligible for funding. So we don't get many of those, thankfully. We also, as much as WLIA likes to occasionally encourage the hand-drawn map, we at the PSC don't care to see them much at all. And we don't traditionally see hand-drawn maps, but probably the quirkiest example we've seen are a few cases where folks have taken photos or maybe scanned a very crude, almost like AutoCAD or blueprint layout of their internet infrastructure that is just in a way that's really hard for us to bring into a good digital format. So we don't really want those either. Our most common suspect sits in the middle, where someone either through using their own infrastructure that they already have traditionally in Google Maps or through modeling their coverage using a third-party software, they're able to overlay something, a service polygon in this example, on top of Google Earth imagery, and they most likely already have a place feature made in Google Earth So basically the digital work is done, but they send us a screen capture and we have to redraw the map from scratch. And all the arguments I made about wasting time and blown accuracy come to the fore. So our best practice that we're going for is, again, trying to encourage our internet service provider community to send us granular files, and they can come in any number of formats at this point, especially given that a lot of standards for this haven't been set as yet. In fact, the feds, and to a lesser extent, we at the state level, are working on figuring this out with more accuracy and certainly to make more precise internet maps. So potential served addresses would be a form that we would accept at the PSC. Road center lines that we would traditionally buffer, like what you see here on the right, are another example. I included modeled coverage as this example on the left. I will tell you the geometry from a modeled coverage style depiction of an internet project usually looks a lot more complex than that simple circle that I made. But again, time and making a screenshot in this case, excuse me, I have to clear my throat. And we certainly would accept really any other realistic polygon-based approach to depict where service would be distributed with a potential internet service project within our grant program. So we're going to jump into our second live demo. What we found out at our webinar last Thursday is a small cut of our potential applicants use ArcGIS, but a lot more of them have access to Google Earth Pro to get their work done. And a lot of this is, as much as we want spatial data and digital data, it's awfully important that we're working with what our providers are able to use as well. So I'm going to go ahead and switch over to Google Earth and give you just a quick idea of what we walked our folks through last Thursday. And checking the screen again, it looks like we are in good shape. So here we are with a hypothetical internet service project on the near west side of Madison, which I will tell you is not eligible for grant funding. Helps that I live across the street from this hypothetical block, so I kind of know what's going on. So what I did here for this mock project is I drew a simple polygon. It even matches the one that we had a couple slides ago. So all I have to do, and many of you who've worked with Google Earth, I'm sure, are familiar with this, all I have to do is go ahead and save this under the Save Place As dialog, have that KMZ or KML file saved up, and then I can go ahead and email that to the Public Service Commission, effectively to Milena and I, and then she and I can load that into our more normal ArcGIS suite of software and have a more accurate depiction of our broadband expansion grant applications, which is really the goal. And I mean, it took me a minute to talk through the process, and doing the physical steps aren't much slower. We actually only have about 5 minutes left, so we're going to try to power through what's left of this slideshow and hopefully take a question or two here. So I'm going to go ahead and switch back to our slides, which seems so much more efficient now, which is wonderful. And there we go. And again, for whenever these slides are released, and certainly you can see a more detailed version of these slides on the Public Service Commission website shortly, but you can see the process that we walked folks through when we did this on Thursday. So Milena, would you like to summarize a few of the other mapping tools that we have out there?
Oh, for sure. I don't know if it's visible yet, our presentation.
How about now?
I still seen our demo. Here it is. It's back.
Okay.
We got it.
Good.
Yeah.
Sorry, I hit the share button late.
No worries. So using this single link that we have available for the viewer of this presentation, the applicant can view all the Wisconsin Broadband Office mapping tools. We have 9 of those interactive mapping tools in this single link. And the first tool available is a key one for the broadband grant application, because it leads the applicant to the Wisconsin Broadband Map, which at this point we are all familiar with. And the applicant can see there the Wisconsin Broadband Expansion Grant eligibility layer, which is the blue colored differentiated layer we showed you in the previous maps. And also at this point, if you're like me, you want to know if those data sets are available for download. And the answer is yes. And using the second link, the user can go in this different page and download several data sets, including the fiscal year 2021 Broadband Expansion Grant eligible status, both in spatial and tabular data. You know what we're talking about at this point. They can also find the data downloadable for some of the other 9 mapping tools. And in fact, one of the mapping tools that I want to point you to is the Wisconsin Broadband Expansion Grant Recipient. This is a particular interesting mapping tool, either for the broadband grant applicants, but also for other research. We just recently received, for example, a request for a professor at UW. And this is a tool that shows projects that receive Wisconsin Broadband Expansion Grant in the previous 7 years. So people can understand what has been already on the ground in terms of technical type of project, but also what is in the pipeline. And by simply clicking on any flags, the user can view general details about the awardees and find a link to their grant application. And with this, I think we can wrap it up.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Milena. And we did actually get a question through the chat window, which is awesome. But certainly if folks want to, we've got about 2 minutes left. So if you want to fire a question off, please type it in the chat very quickly. And we'll do what we can. So one of the questions that we have, and I'll field this one, is who is the typical grant applicant? Local telcos, large regional or national carriers, municipalities, design and construction contractors, etc. So I'm going to give you a very layperson sort of response while I get ready to switch screens here. And in general, basically, and there were a set of standards, if you will, for this. We usually encourage either ISPs or per statute, ISPs are able to, ISPs, sorry, short for Internet Service Providers or telecommunications firms, are able to apply for grants. Any other organization that is basically a non-government entity can apply for a broadband expansion grant, and governmental entities like counties, municipalities can apply for a grant if they are partnered up with an internet service provider. So we've seen a number of, over the last several years, a number of different forms of applicants, a lot of small governments that are linked up with the provider community, a lot of providers doing their own thing, really. So there's a number of options out there. I don't know that I would say that there's maybe one particular type of provider who applies more than most. I would say small co-ops tend to be pretty notable and pretty present in our application rounds. So one person acknowledged that we've got a black screen up, and that is correct because I am starting to do the screen switching for our next presentation. It is 1:45 and I don't see any other questions. There is a comment or two out there that the PSC is starting to get an ArcGIS online presence. Certainly that is a thing in process. So thanks for acknowledging that. And we've got a bit of a ways to go on that one, but you will see and hear more about that. And I anticipate us moving more in the open data page direction or hub portal direction in the near future, but that's a conversation for another day. So I want to thank you all, and thank you, Milena, for all of our participation in the different roles that we've had. And that wraps up the PSC's presentation.